Rome was ruled by 7 kings, one after another, for a century and a half. The last 3 Roman kings were not Romans at all, but Etruscans, immigrants from Asia Minor. They ruled from 620 to 509 BC. During this time, Rome became the largest and most powerful city in Italy. The stone wall, the circus where horsemen and charioteers competed, the Capitoline Temple, the Forum, all these were structures built during the time of the Tarquinii, as the Etruscan rulers in Rome were called, since the first of them came from the city of Tarquinii. Early in the morning, the guard who watched over the gates of Tarquinii heard the clatter of wheels. Peering out from his hiding place, I saw a covered wagon rolling down the narrow street, followed by 4 more wagons, loaded with belongings and silver. At the gates, the driver stopped the mules, the wagon's curtain parted, and a woman's head appeared, dressed for travel. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me and helps me keep writing new stories for you. Thank you for your support. The guard bowed respectfully and said, "So you, Tanaquil, have decided to leave for foreign lands after all?" The woman called Tanaquil did not answer immediately, probably considering whether it was worth explaining to the guard what was forcing her to leave her native city. "Finally," she said, "even one's homeland becomes foreign when there is no respect for one's husband." The guard nodded sympathetically and pulled the rope that opened the gates. The wagon entered the dark corridor formed by 2 walls, and from there came Tanaquil's muffled voice, echoing, "Farewell, homeland." The guard called out. At midday, it became stuffy in the wagon, and Tanaquil ordered the driver to lower the curtain. Lucumo ran his palm across his face as if wiping away the remnants of sleep, and opening his eyes, exclaimed, "Look, the Tiber already!" "And beyond the Tiber lies Rome," Tanaquil added. "Rome?" Lucumo wondered. "You call this village Rome, but I don't see a single house with tiles. And where are the temples? Where, finally, is the circus? I think before exchanging Tarquinii for Rome, we should have seen it first, and then you would have stayed in Tarquinii forever," Tanaquil said with indignation in her voice. "You would always have been despised as a foreigner." "What are you talking about?" Lucumo said irritably. "Yes, my father is Demaratus of Corinth, but my mother is from a respected family, and I was born in Tarquinii. In Rome, I will be a complete stranger." "Rome consists of strangers," Tanaquil objected. "And you won't be an oddity there. This city was founded by Romulus, a man without family or tribe, and its first inhabitants were shepherds and slaves, who fled from Tarquinii and other Etruscan cities. Then they all attacked the Sabine girls and started families. Half Latins and half Sabines, that's who the Romans are. And you—" "Wait," Lucumo interrupted. "There's a herd there, without a shepherd or watchdog." "I don't see any herd," Tanaquil replied irritably. "Look, there's a tall hill with 2 peaks, and to the right another hill built up with huts, and between them it's empty. And sheep are grazing there, right in the center of the city." "What a city!" At that moment, a gigantic eagle fell like a stone from the sky and, seizing Lucumo's traveling hat, soared back into the heights. The people who had gathered by then near the narrow bridge, thrown on piles across the Tiber, could not recover from amazement for a long time. Tanaquil was the first to come to her senses. Embracing her husband, she cried, "This eagle is a messenger of Tin. Tin has made it clear that a crown and royal power await you." Tanaquil, as everyone soon became convinced, proved to be right. Lucumo, or Lucius Tarquinius, as the Romans began to call him according to their customs, was elected Roman king after the death of Ancus Marcius. Having gained the crown, he first began to rebuild Rome through the lowland, the very one that Lucumo had seen when approaching Rome. Streams flowed that carried water mixed with filth from swamps where malaria and other diseases nested. Lucumo first ordered canals to be dug and, passing the streams through them, commanded them to be covered with stone vaults from above, because he had seen this done in Tarquinii. These structures the Romans began to call sewers. In the empty space that was formed, he forbade grazing cattle. But since the Romans could not get rid of the bad habit of watching animals graze from their houses. He ordered the former meadow to be paved and turned into a market square and a place for citizens to gather the forum. Later, he built his palace on the forum. Here, merchants also began to build their shops and warehouses. On the Capitoline Hill, which rose above the forum, after a successful war, by Tarquin's command, a magnificent temple was laid to Tin Jupiter and his two companion goddesses, Uni and Minerva. The Romans began to call them Juno and Minerva. Of course, Tarquin would have managed to build the temple on the Capitol if he had not directed most of his money and the strength of his subjects to another structure. Another lowland between the hills was drained and turned into a circus, better than which no city in Italy had. This was the first of the Roman circuses, and when others appeared, it began to be called the greatest, because it could accommodate 150,000 people. Not a month passed without boxing matches or chariot races taking place here, and the king was present at every spectacle. In construction, entertainment, and wars passed the life of Tarquin, and when he died, his son-in-law Servius Tullius took his place. Different stories were told about the origin of Servius Tullius. The Romans believed that he was born in the royal palace to a servant named Lucretia, and Queen Tanaquil, who knew how to interpret various omens, prophesied a great future for the child, gave him her daughter in marriage. But the Etruscans insisted that the real name of Tarquin's successor was not Servius Tullius, but Mastarna, and that this Mastarna, together with a band of adventurers, seized power in Rome by force, removing Tarquin's heir. However it may have been, Servius Tullius Mastarna was considered a remarkable person, the true creator of the Roman state. At that time, the Roman army consisted of patricians who formed armed detachments based on family relationships. The plebeians, who did not belong to patrician families, were used only as servants of the patricians when needed. Not interested in Rome's victories, the plebeians fought poorly or completely refused to support the state. Like Solon, whose state transformation Servius Tullius knew about, he divided the Romans, regardless of whether they were patricians or plebeians, into categories, or, as the Romans called them, according to wealth. There were 5 such classes. Each class provided a certain number of military units, centuries, hundreds of infantry. The first class had 80 centuries of infantry. The second, third, and fourth classes had 20 centuries each of infantry with lighter and cheaper weapons. The fifth class had 30 centuries. Very poor citizens called proletarians provided only 1 century of craftsmen and baggage servants. Thus the new classes replaced the previous tribal division. These classes were created by wealth, not by origin. A poor patrician could fall into the 5th class, while a wealthy plebeian could enter the 1st. The patricians retained only the right to form cavalry from 18 centuries. In the first popular assemblies created by Servius Tullius, each class had as many votes as it provided centuries. Therefore, the first class alone, which included the cavalry, had 98 votes, more than all the other classes combined. The new state organization introduced by Servius Tullius was preserved for many centuries, even after the kings were overthrown. Later, consuls and other officials began to be elected at centuriate assemblies. Servius Tullius was succeeded by another Etruscan ruler, Tarquin. He was an autocrat who reckoned with neither the Senate nor the people. Therefore, he acquired the nickname Proud, while the first Tarquin began to be called the Elder. Tarquin the Proud expanded Rome's possessions by subjugating tribes in the mountains of Latium. He invited experienced Etruscan craftsmen, and placing them in charge of the Romans, completed the construction of many buildings that Tarquin the Elder had begun to erect. And although Rome grew greatly and became more beautiful under Tarquin, the plebeians hated the king and preserved in songs a good memory of the benefactor king, Servius Tullius. One day an event occurred in the royal palace that horrified Tarquin the Proud. A large snake crawled out of the altar and began to devour the sacrificial offerings that, according to ancient custom, were left for the gods, protectors of the house. Tanaquil had long since died, and no one could explain what the gods wanted to say with this omen. Then the king decided to send an embassy to the Hellenes, whom the Etruscans, and following them the Romans, called Greeks, who had people who could prophesy oracles. The most famous was considered to be the oracle at Delphi. 3 ambassadors were sent there, Titus and Orens, the king's sons, and Junius Brutus, a man of noble birth, but, as was thought, not very intelligent. The name Brutus translates as stupid. The ambassadors entered a dark room, and the Delphic priestess, having heard the story of what had happened in the royal house, leaned over the cleft from which poisonous gases emerged and mumbled something incoherently. "She says," explained the priest who stood nearby, "that he who first kisses his mother will become king." Tarquin's ambassadors thanked the priest and priestess and set off home. They knew that by custom one could not ask for explanations of the words of the prophetic priestess. Understand as you know how. One thing was clear. Their father had little time left to reign, and he would have a successor. Titus and Aruns thought that the priestess's words concerned them and their brother Sextus, who had remained in Rome, but he could be disregarded, since he did not know about the oracle, and their mother, the queen, did not love the scoundrel Sextus, and would not allow him to kiss her. "One of us will become king," Titus said to Brutus. "When we enter the gates of Rome, Aruns and I will run, and whoever arrives first will receive the crown. And you need not hurry," Aruns added, "for your mother died long ago." They boarded a ship. The king's sons urged the helmsman on, promising him a great reward if he delivered them to the Roman port of Ostia within 9 days. From there one could reach Rome in a few hours. Greedy for money, the helmsman brought the ship to Ostia in 5 days, and so the ambassadors enter the gates, and 2 of them stand at the boundary like runners. Brutus, as judge, gave a signal with his hand, and Tarquin's sons ran. But Brutus himself, pretending that he had lost his balance from a strong wave and fallen to the ground, inconspicuously touched it with his lips. He, who was considered a fool, understood what the oracle said in his own way. He who first kisses the native soil of Rome will become king. Soon Tarquin the Proud began a war with the Rutulians, a tribe hostile to. Tarquin decided to capture their rich city of Ardea in order to pass his state to his successors, even more powerful than he himself had received it from Servius Tullius. But Ardea was located on a hill with steep slopes and also had strong walls. They had to make camp at the foot of the hill and wait until the Ardeans, unable to withstand the test of hunger, would lay down their arms themselves. During the siege, the king's sons, Titus, Aruns, and Sextus, were in the Roman army. They wasted time drinking wine and playing the favorite Etruscan game of dice, which, according to legend, their ancestors had invented back in Asia Minor. One day, their distant relative, Lucius Collatinus, joined them. Heated by wine, they began talking about women, and each praised his wife, assuring that she was the most beautiful and hard-working. The argument became more and more tense and could have ended in a fight if Collatinus had not suddenly had this thought. "Why are we arguing?" he said, rising. "They say rightly, don't trust words. Trust your eyes, and you will be convinced that my Lucretia is the best wife." The king's sons exchanged glances silently. Just as silently they left the tent and went to the post where their horses were tied. In a couple of hours they were already in Rome, without even entering the annex to the palace that Tarquin had allocated to his married sons, but only looking at the brightly lit windows and hearing the clinking of cups. One could understand that the prince's wives, left alone, were enjoying life. "Our wives are having fun," Sextus said to Collatinus, "but your wife probably hasn't been wasting time either." Blood boiled in Collatinus's veins. He could barely restrain himself from drawing his sword. "Let's go to my place in Galatia," he said hoarsely. An hour later they found themselves in a small town lying 10 miles from Rome. All the inhabitants were already asleep, but a light was burning in Collatinus's house. The travelers dismounted and entered the house. They saw Lucretia in a circle of slave women. Spinning wheels rustled quietly. Hearing the doors creak, Lucretia looked around. Her cheeks flushed, and in a moment she was in Collatinus's arms, with envy and amazement. Sextus watched this scene. He had already forgotten that he had lost the argument, and about his shame, which Collatinus had witnessed. Sextus was struck by the beauty of the young woman, her extraordinary purity and modesty. In the mind of this young man, corrupted by power and accustomed to satisfying any of his whims, a criminal plan arose. Part 2 reveals the complex political reforms that transformed Rome from a tribal society into a structured state, while simultaneously building toward the tragic events that would end the monarchy forever. The character of Brutus begins to emerge from his facade of simplicity, and the seeds of the final catastrophe are planted in Sextus's corrupt heart. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What happens next in part 3? Asterisk, asterisk. Sextus Tarquin's heinous crime against Lucretia, the heroic suicide that will spark a revolution. Brutus's transformation from fool to revolutionary leader, the dramatic confrontation that will change Rome forever. Asterisk, asterisk. Political and social commentary. Asterisk, asterisk. The reforms of Servius Tullius represent one of the most significant political innovations in ancient history. By replacing birth-based tribal divisions with wealth-based classes, he created a system that would influence democratic development for millennia. The Centuriate Assembly, where voting power was distributed according to economic contribution to the state, balanced democratic participation with practical governance needs. The character of Tarquin the Proud embodies the classic tyrant, powerful and effective but lacking the consent of the governed. His architectural achievements, including completion of the Capitoline Temple and various infrastructure projects, demonstrated the dual nature of autocratic rule, capable of grand accomplishments but ultimately unsustainable without popular support. Asterisk, asterisk. Character development. Asterisk, asterisk. This section masterfully develops the theme of hidden wisdom versus apparent foolishness through Brutus, whose interpretation of the oracle reveals a deeper understanding than his reputation suggests. His kiss of Roman soil rather than his biological mother demonstrates both political acuity and genuine patriotism, qualities that will soon transform him from court jester to founding father of the Republic. The contrast between public duty and private corruption is embodied in the parallel stories of Servius Tullius's beneficial reforms and Sextus's growing moral decay. These parallel narratives create dramatic tension while illustrating the fragile nature of political institutions when personal virtue fails. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me and helps me keep writing new stories for you. Thank you for your support. The next night, Sextus left the camp, claiming urgent business in Rome. There was Collatinus's house. Hearing the clatter of hooves, Lucretia rushed to the door. She thought her husband had come again, but it was Sextus Tarquin. Hiding her disappointment, Lucretia hospitably welcomed the guest. The slave women brought food and prepared a room for Sextus to rest. But sleep would not come to him. With his naked sword he waited until everything in the house grew quiet. Then he burst into Lucretia's chambers. The moment that villain left Collatinus's house, Lucretia sent servants to her parents and to her husband. "Let them come immediately," she commanded. Collatinus, to whom the servant came, was very disturbed. Knowing Lucretia's character, he understood that something extraordinary had happened. Otherwise, she would not have sent for him. Therefore Collatinus asked his comrade Brutus to accompany him. They found Lucretia in mourning clothes. Tears flowed down her chalk-white cheeks. "What happened?" Collatinus asked. And then Lucretia told of the unheard-of wrong that she had suffered from the king's son. "Swear to me," she concluded, "to punish the vile criminal." "We swear," the men said, extending their swords forward. "Now I can die in peace," Lucretia said. Having spoken these words, she tore a knife from the wall and struck herself in the chest with it. Everyone froze in horror. Brutus was the first to recover. He pulled the knife from the wound and raised it above his head. "I swear by the blood of noble Lucretia, the best of Roman women, to take revenge on the family of the Tarquins. Sextus's crime has made the royal family our enemies. Rome must free itself from the power of foreign kings." After this, Brutus ordered Lucretia's bier to be raised and carried to the Forum of Galatia. Here Brutus called the citizens to arms. Soon a huge crowd of armed men set out for Rome. The Romans were at first frightened when they saw the excited people shouting something, and scattered to their homes. But Brutus sent messengers to all corners of the city to gather citizens in the Forum. Thus the Romans learned about the crime in Galatia and decided to forever banish Tarquin the Proud and his family from Rome. News of the events in Rome reached Ardea, where Tarquin the Proud was encamped. Hoping that he would be able to persuade the Romans to make concessions, Tarquin marched on Rome. The Romans closed the city gate before him, and from the walls announced their decision to him. Tarquin had to go into exile. Together with his family, he departed for the city of Caer. From then on, Rome began to be governed by popular assemblies, the Senate, and officials who were re-elected annually. The highest officials, the consuls, had almost royal power, but only for 1 year. The Romans called this system a republic. The first consuls elected were Brutus, who understood the words of the oracle, and Lucretia's husband, Tarquinius. But the story of the Tarquins was far from over. The expelled royal family would not accept their fate quietly. From their exile in Caer, they began plotting their return to power, seeking allies among Rome's enemies and stirring up discontent within the city itself. The young republic faced its first and perhaps greatest test. Could a government based on shared power and annual elections withstand the determined assault of those who believed in the divine right of kings? The transformation of Rome from monarchy to republic was not merely a change of government, but a fundamental shift in how people understood power, citizenship, and the relationship between ruler and ruled. The sacrifice of Lucretia had become more than a personal tragedy. It was the spark that ignited a political revolution whose effects would echo through the centuries. Brutus, no longer the fool he had pretended to be, now revealed himself as a man of iron will and unwavering principle. His first act as consul was to make all Romans swear an oath, never again to allow a king to rule in Rome. This oath would be remembered and renewed by generations of Romans, becoming one of the foundational myths of republican government. Yet even as the Romans celebrated their newfound freedom, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The Tarquins had not fled alone. They had taken with them the loyalty of many Etruscan cities, and they possessed both the wealth and connections necessary to wage war against their former subjects. The new republic would soon learn that freedom, once won, must constantly be defended. The character of the early Roman Republic was shaped by this foundational trauma. The fear of tyranny would influence Roman political institutions for centuries, creating elaborate checks and balances designed to prevent any individual from gaining too much power. The consulship itself, with its division of authority between two equal magistrates serving limited terms, reflected the republican determination never again to place unlimited power in the hands of one person. But the deeper change was in the Roman conception of citizenship itself. No longer subjects of a king, the Romans now saw themselves as participants in their own governance. The centuriate assembly, the Senate, the various magistrates all represented different aspects of the citizen's role in the state. This was a profound shift from the passive obedience expected under monarchy to the active engagement required in a republic. The tragic figure of Lucretia became a symbol of both the price of freedom and the virtue required to maintain it. Her story was told and retold throughout Roman history, not merely as entertainment but as moral instruction. She represented the ideal of personal honor that must never be compromised, even at the cost of life itself. Her sacrifice demonstrated that some things, virtue, honor, the integrity of the family, were more important than mere survival. The transformation of Brutus from apparent fool to founding father illustrated another crucial Roman value: the importance of service to the state above personal advancement. His willingness to overthrow the monarchy, despite his position at court, showed that true patriotism sometimes required the most difficult choices. His interpretation of the oracle's prophecy, kissing the earth of Rome rather than his biological mother, symbolized the shift from personal loyalty to patriotic duty that would define the republican ethos. The new Roman Republic faced immediate challenges that would test whether its ideals could survive contact with reality. The Tarquins' exile was only the beginning of a longer struggle between the forces of monarchy and republicanism that would shape the ancient world. Other Italian cities watched nervously as Rome experimented with this new form of government, wondering whether the republican system could provide the stability and strength that monarchy had offered. The economic implications of the change were also significant. The great building projects of the Tarquin era had required the concentrated resources that only royal authority could command. Could a government dependent on annual elections and shared power muster the resources and maintain the continuity necessary for major public works? The early years of the Republic would provide the answer to these questions, as the Romans learned to balance their commitment to limited government with the practical needs of a growing city-state. Part 3 brings the tragic climax of the royal era, as personal honor and political freedom converge in Lucretia's sacrifice and Brutus's transformation. The rape of Lucretia becomes the catalyst for revolution, demonstrating how private wrongs can ignite public upheaval. when they symbolize deeper injustices in the political system. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What happens next in Part 4? Asterisk, asterisk. The early struggles of the new Roman Republic. The Tarquins' attempts to regain power through war and conspiracy. The harsh test of loyalty that will define Roman citizenship. The price of freedom and the sacrifices required to preserve it. Asterisk, asterisk. Moral and political themes. Asterisk, asterisk. The story of Lucretia raises profound questions about honor, justice, and the relationship between personal virtue and political order. Her decision to take her own life rather than live with dishonor reflects ancient values that may seem alien to modern readers. Yet her choice catalyzed changes that would influence Western political thought for millennia. The narrative explores the tension between individual desire and social responsibility, embodied in Sextus's abuse of power and the collective response it provoked. This theme, the corruption of authority and the popular reaction it generates, remains relevant in any discussion of political legitimacy and the limits of governmental power. Asterisk, asterisk, historical significance. Asterisk, asterisk. The establishment of the Roman Republic marked a crucial moment in world history. The system of government created in response to the Tarquin tyranny, with its emphasis on divided authority, limited terms of office, and accountability to the people, would inspire political theorists and revolutionaries for centuries to come. The American founding fathers, the leaders of the French Revolution, and countless other champions of democratic government would look back to this moment as a foundational example of how free peoples could organize themselves for effective governance while protecting individual liberty. The early years of the Roman Republic tested every principle upon which the new government was founded. The Tarquins, from their exile in Caere, did not simply accept their fate but began actively plotting their return to power. They understood that the republican system, however noble in principle, was still fragile and untested. A combination of external pressure and internal dissent might yet restore them to the throne they considered rightfully theirs. Their first opportunity came through an unexpected source: their own former subjects. Many Romans, particularly among the patrician class, had grown wealthy and powerful under the monarchy. These men found the new system of shared authority and popular participation threatening to their interests. The consulship, with its annual rotation and accountability to the people, seemed a poor substitute for the predictable favor of a king who understood the natural order of society. In secret meetings held in the houses of prominent families, whispered conversations began about the good old days of royal rule. Was it not true, they asked themselves, that the great buildings of Rome, the temples, the circus, the drainage systems, had all been built under the kings? Could a government dependent on the whims of popular assemblies ever achieve such magnificent projects again? These doubts were carefully nurtured by agents of the exiled Tarquins, who moved secretly through the city spreading gold and promises of restoration. Meanwhile, Brutus faced the enormous challenge of transforming his revolutionary rhetoric into practical governance. As one of the first consuls, he discovered that destroying a system of government was far easier than creating a new one. Every decision required consultation with his colleague, negotiation with the Senate, and often approval from the popular assemblies. Where once a king could issue a decree and see it immediately implemented, the new system required patience, compromise, and endless discussion. The first great crisis came when several young patricians, including Brutus's own sons, were discovered to be part of a conspiracy to restore the monarchy. Letters found in their possession revealed the full extent of the plot. The conspirators planned to open the city gates at night to admit an army led by the Tarquins themselves. The discovery sent shockwaves through Roman society. If the sons of the founding consul could betray the Republic, who could be trusted? The situation posed an agonizing dilemma for Brutus. As a father, every instinct urged him to find some way to spare his children. As a magistrate, he was sworn to uphold the law without favor or exception. As the symbol of the new republican order, he understood that his response would define whether Rome would live by the principles it professed or abandon them at the first test. The trial was held in the Forum, with the entire population of Rome as witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming, the confessions clear. According to law, the penalty for treason was death. The other consul, Tarquinius, found himself equally compromised. His own family connections to the conspirators made his impartiality questionable. The weight of judgment fell entirely on Brutus. Standing before his sons, Brutus spoke the words that would echo through Roman history. "The Roman people have entrusted me with the authority to preserve their freedom. I cannot allow personal feelings to compromise that sacred trust." He gave the signal, and the lictors carried out the sentence. The founder of the Republic watched his own children die for the principles he had helped establish. This terrible sacrifice established the precedent that would define Roman Republican virtue for centuries to come. The supremacy of public duty over private interest. No consideration of family, friendship, or personal advantage could be allowed to compromise the integrity of the state. The story of Brutus and his sons became a touchstone for Roman moral education, taught to every generation as an example of the price that freedom sometimes demands. But the internal conspiracy was only the beginning of the Republic's trials. The Tarquins, frustrated in their hopes for internal restoration, turned to external allies. They approached Lars Porsena, the powerful Etruscan king of Clusium, arguing that the Roman Revolution threatened the natural order throughout central Italy. If successful, they warned, the Republican model might spread to other cities, undermining royal authority everywhere. Porsena, convinced by this argument and enticed by promises of Roman wealth, assembled a massive army and marched on Rome. The siege of Rome by Porsena's forces became the Republic's defining moment. The city found itself completely surrounded, its food supplies cut off, its population facing starvation. Many Romans began to question whether their experiment in self-government was worth such suffering. Would it not be better to submit to Porsena, who might restore order and stability, even if it meant accepting some form of foreign rule? Yet it was during this darkest hour that the Republican spirit showed its true strength. Rather than surrender, the Romans discovered resources of courage and determination they had never known they possessed. Stories emerged from the siege that would become legendary. Horatius defending the bridge single-handedly against the entire Etruscan army. Mucius Scaevola burning his own hand to demonstrate Roman resolve. Cloelia leading her fellow hostages in a daring escape across the Tiber. These tales, whether historically accurate in every detail or not, captured something essential about the transformation that Republican government had worked in the Roman character. No longer subjects waiting for a king to protect them, the Romans had become citizens willing to die for their city and their freedom. The siege, rather than breaking their spirit, forged it into something harder and more enduring than any monarchy could have achieved. The resolution of the siege also demonstrated the diplomatic skills that would later make Rome master of the Mediterranean world. Rather than simply fighting until destruction, the Romans learned to negotiate, to compromise, to find solutions that served their long-term interests, while allowing their enemies to save face. Porsena was eventually persuaded to withdraw not through military defeat, but through a combination of Roman determination, strategic concessions, and perhaps a growing recognition that the Republican experiment might actually succeed. The successful defense against Porsena marked the end of the Tarquins' realistic hopes for restoration. No longer could they claim that the Roman people yearned for their return, or that the Republic was too weak to defend itself. The new system had passed its most severe test, proving that free citizens could match or exceed the achievements of royal subjects in both war and peace. Part 4 explores the harsh realities of building a new form of government, as the idealistic principles of republicanism confront the practical challenges of conspiracy, war, and the terrible choices that leadership sometimes demands. The story of Brutus and his sons becomes the defining example of republican virtue, while the siege by Porsena tests whether the new system can survive external pressure. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What happens next in Part 5? Asterisk, asterisk. The final defeat of the Tarquin Restoration, the consolidation of republican institutions and traditions, the emergence of Rome as a power to be reckoned with in central Italy, the lasting legacy of these foundational years for Roman civilization. Asterisk, asterisk, the price of liberty. Asterisk, asterisk. This section unflinchingly examines the costs that freedom sometimes exacts from those who choose it. Brutus's sacrifice of his own sons illustrates the fundamental tension between personal loyalty and public duty that would define Roman political culture. The story asks difficult questions about the nature of justice, the requirements of leadership, and the price that societies must sometimes pay to maintain their principles. The siege by Porsena represents the external test that every revolutionary government must face, the challenge from established powers who see the new system as a threat to their own authority. Rome's successful defense becomes not just a military victory but a proof of concept for republican government itself. The final phase of the Tarquin saga unfolded not with dramatic battles or palace intrigue, but with the quiet recognition that an era had truly ended. The exiled royal family, after years of plotting and scheming, gradually faded into historical obscurity. Their various attempts at restoration through internal conspiracy, foreign intervention, and diplomatic pressure had all failed, not because of any single decisive defeat, but because Rome itself had changed in ways that made monarchy impossible. The transformation was most visible in the generation that had grown up under republican government. These young Romans had no memory of royal rule, no nostalgia for the good old days that never seemed quite as good to those who had actually lived through them. They took for granted the rights and responsibilities of citizenship that their parents had won through revolution and defended through war. For them, the idea that any single person could claim divine authority over the Roman people seemed not merely wrong but ridiculous. The institutional changes proved even more durable than the psychological ones. The system of checks and balances that had emerged from necessity during the early crises became established custom, then sacred tradition. No magistrate served more than a year. No individual held power without a colleague to watch and potentially veto his actions. No major decision was made without consultation among multiple bodies representing different interests within the state. These arrangements, which had initially seemed cumbersome and inefficient to those accustomed to royal decisiveness, gradually proved their worth. The annual rotation of offices prevented the accumulation of personal power that had enabled the Tarquins to become tyrants. The requirement for consensus building, though slow, produced policies that enjoyed broader support and lasted longer than royal decrees. The accountability to popular assemblies, though sometimes inconvenient for the ruling class, ensured that the government remained responsive to the needs of the people who provided its soldiers and paid its taxes. The economic development of Rome under the Republic provided perhaps the most convincing argument for the new system. Where the kings had built monuments to their own glory, the Republican government invested in infrastructure that served the common good. New aqueducts brought fresh water to every neighborhood. Improved roads connected Rome to the growing network of allied cities. Expanded port facilities handled the increasing trade that flowed through the city. These practical improvements in daily life made abstract political theories concrete and personal for ordinary citizens. The military successes of the early republic also contrasted favorably with the limited achievements of the monarchical period. Free citizens, fighting for their own city and their own government, proved more effective soldiers than subjects fighting for a king. The centuriate system created by Servius Tullius reached its full potential under republican leadership, as citizens who had political rights also had military obligations they willingly fulfilled. The army became not just a tool of government but an expression of the civic virtue that republican ideology promoted. Cultural changes accompanied and reinforced the political ones. Children learned not about royal genealogies but about the sacrifices of Lucretia, the wisdom of Brutus, the courage of those who defended the early republic. These stories shaped values and expectations in ways that made restoration of monarchy increasingly unthinkable. The religious practices of Rome also evolved to support republican values. Where kings had claimed divine sanction for their personal rule, the republican government emphasized the god's favor for the Roman people as a whole. Religious ceremonies celebrated the city's collective achievements rather than individual rulers. The augury and other forms of divination that had once validated royal decisions now served to guide the deliberations of the Senate and assemblies. By the time Tarquin the Proud died in exile, a forgotten old man in a foreign city, the Rome he had once ruled no longer existed. The physical city remained, larger and more prosperous than ever. But the political and social structures that had supported monarchy had been completely transformed. His sons, if they still lived, were foreigners in the land of their birth, unable to understand the language of citizenship and civic virtue that had replaced the older discourse of royal authority and subject obedience. The final irony of the Tarquin story lay in their most lasting legacy. The very tyranny that had provoked their overthrow became the founding myth of republican government. Each generation of Romans learned why kings were dangerous, why power must be limited, Why vigilance was the price of freedom. The Tarquins, in their very failure, provided the cautionary tale that would help preserve the system they had unwittingly created through their own excesses. The Roman Republic that emerged from these foundational struggles would endure for nearly 5 centuries, expanding from a small city-state to master of the Mediterranean world, democratic governments. Yet the story also carried a warning that later Romans sometimes forgot to their cost. The Republic had been born from the failure of monarchy, but it required constant vigilance and active citizenship to survive. When Romans became complacent about their freedoms, when they allowed ambition to override civic virtue, when they forgot the lessons of their founding stories, they opened the door to new forms of tyranny that would eventually destroy the system their ancestors had died to create. The tale of the Tarquinii thus became both Rome's greatest success story and its most enduring cautionary tale. It demonstrated that free peoples could govern themselves effectively, but only if they remained worthy of the freedom they claimed. The price of liberty, as the Romans learned and taught the world, was not just eternal vigilance, but eternal virtue. The willingness to place the common good above personal advantage, public duty above private desire, and the welfare of future generations above the temptations of the present moment. In the end, the Tarquins' greatest service to Rome may have been their very failure. By showing how power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, they provided the negative example that would guide Republican statecraft for generations. Their story became the mirror in which Romans could see what they must never again become, the cautionary tale that helped preserve the freedom their tyranny had made possible. Part 5 brings the epic to its conclusion, showing how the Roman Republic consolidated its institutions and values, while the Tarquin threat gradually faded into historical memory. The story's end reveals that true revolution lies not in single dramatic events but in the slow transformation of culture, values, and institutions that makes the old order not just defeated but inconceivable. The enduring legacy. The story of the Tarquinii in Rome became one of history's most influential political narratives. From the fall of the Roman Republic through the American Revolution to modern democratic movements, leaders and citizens have returned to these themes of liberty versus tyranny, civic virtue versus corruption, public duty versus private interest. The narrative demonstrates that successful political change requires more than replacing one set of rulers with another. It demands a fundamental transformation in how people understand their relationship to power and authority. The Romans succeeded where so many other revolutionary movements have failed, because they created not just new institutions, but new values and traditions that made those institutions sustainable across generations. Historical significance. These events, whether historically accurate in every detail or refined through generations of retelling, shaped the political consciousness of the Western world. The Roman Republic's example showed that large, complex societies could be governed without kings, that power could be shared and limited, that citizens could be both rulers and ruled. These lessons, transmitted through Roman law, literature, and historical writing, would influence political theorists from Cicero to Montesquieu, from the founding fathers of America to the architects of modern democratic constitutions. The story reminds us that freedom is not a natural state but a human achievement, won through struggle and maintained through constant effort. The Tarquinii, in their rise and fall, embody both the allure and the danger of absolute power, while the Roman response demonstrates the possibility and the cost of choosing a different path.